Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I'm coming to you from Chartres in France, where I have a little Airbnb very close to the cathedral. I want to welcome you to day 48 of Humanity Rising. Every day since the 22nd of May, we've been coming to you between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European time as just an offering from Ubiquity University to provide an open space for people quite to gather together via Zoom to share how they're navigating through the pandemic, to take counsel together as to how we can enhance our strategic effectiveness so that we can ensure that the post-pandemic world is more sustainable and resilient and healthy and aligned with natural systems. And we have been extraordinarily blessed. We're live streaming on Awake TV and a variety of partners to about 15,000 people a day. We have registrations from over 100 countries. And we are building our community on our UbiVerse. I invite all of you to use our platform for blogs and videos and conversations of any kind as you navigate through this unprecedented human experience, where for the first time in literally human history, virtually everyone everywhere is undergoing the same duress and therefore is in the same conversation. Today, we want to dwell on a very important interface between spirituality and social action. Usually, people who are spiritually inclined have gone into the monasteries or into the forests, and with few very important exceptions, say, for example, like a Mother Teresa, spirituality and action in the world have been largely kept distinct. But the crisis that we're in is compelling all of us to rethink ancient categories. As an example, Ubiquity University. If you think of most universities and institutions of higher education, what are they about? They're about knowledge. They give you knowledge, you memorize the information, you take a test. If you do well, you get a degree and off you go. They're not particularly interested in your personal life. They're not interested in your spiritual or interior journey. Because the only thing they test you on is how well you memorize information. Given the urgency of our time, what Ubiquity has done is we have said that knowledge is not enough. It's certainly important, but it's actually about 1/3 of the overall equation. The other third is what we call personal development, your spiritual journey, how you're developing your soft skills, your self-esteem. And thirdly, it's about action in the world. So we may be one of the few universities out there that has tilted the access of a university away from an exclusive reliance on knowledge to including one's spiritual development, one's personal development, and one's action in the world in a curriculum that encourages learners to come together and solve global problems. So when we look, as we will today, on the interface between spirituality and action, we are going into probably the most potentiated interface possibly in the world. Just think for a moment of how the great spiritual traditions have moved and shaped entire civilizations. People act according to what they believe. Crusades were fought between the Muslims and the Christians for centuries because of belief. Buddhism swept the world beginning in 2500 BC and established universality across Asia. And then after the Second World War, into the West. Think of all the movements, the civil rights movement. Think of India and the movement of Gandhi. Think of Mandela, the power of social movements, the power of the motivation for justice. And then think of the catalytic power if you brought spirit and action together in a fusion that Andrew Harvey, the great mystic and author, calls sacred activism. That's what we want to contemplate today. With a young woman I had the pleasure of meeting about a month, 6 weeks ago, and I was very intrigued by our conversation, Sadhvi Saraswati in the Parmarth Niketan Ashram in India. She's had an extraordinary journey, and she had some compelling things to say about this interface between spirit and action. And we'll get to our dialogue with her in just a moment, but we want to start, as we always have, with our poet laureate for Humanity Rising, with some poetry from Kim Rosen, and then we'll jump into our dialogue with Sadhvi. Kim?
Thank you, Jim. What an inspiring entry into today's dialogue. I'm honored to be with you, and I want to offer a poem by a beloved poet who probably would not have seen herself as an activist, and yet her poetry is infusing so many of us as a sort of prayer. Many of you will recognize Mary Oliver's voice in this poem. It's a poem called Sunrise, and the music is by Gary Malkin. It's a piece called Letting Yourself Be Loved. So I offer this as a prayer for our entry into this deep dialogue. Sunrise by Mary Oliver. You could die for it. An idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, as I walk the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe. And I thought how the sun blazes just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes. And I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. And it is another one of the ways to enter fire. You could die for it. An idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, as I walk the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe, and I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. And it is another one of the ways to enter fire. And I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness, and it is another one of the ways to enter fire. Thank you. A poem called Sunrise by Mary Oliver, with music by Gary Malkin.
Thank you, Kim. That's such a powerful poem, and it's a perfect introduction to our dialogue today with Sadhvi Saraswati. Sadhvi, I hope that everything was sorted out from the technical end. We didn't have a chance to sync up before the call, but I want to welcome you. And I want to begin by just asking you to tell us about your journey from California, from Los Angeles. You did your PhD at Stanford, and then you went to India and were immersed in that culture and that spirituality ever since. And it's so paradigmatic for the West to go to the East. And you've done it in such an extraordinary way. I think people would be very interested in just initially just hearing about your journey.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's such a joy to be with you. And yeah, we couldn't get the time in advance to get the tech sync up, but I was confident. I knew that we were synced, we were connected, and it all was going to work out absolutely perfectly. And of course, it has. So for me, the journey, when you were beginning by speaking about what Ubiquity University does and that emphasis on spirituality and that emphasis on the fullness of the being, it's a perfect place actually to begin the sharing of my journey, because that really is what I have learned so deeply. I grew up in California, in Los Angeles, in a very, very typical in many ways, atypical in other ways, of course, but very typical in terms of the upper class, privileged, well-educated American family. And I had access to everything, all of the best of the education, of the opportunities. My parents gave me everything. And as you said, yes, I graduated from Stanford, and I graduated there with a degree in psychology. I then was in the midst of doing my PhD when I came to India. And the thing that was so acutely obvious to me about 2 weeks after I got here, within the first, I don't know, few hours of being here in Rishikesh, I had this extraordinary transformation, spiritual awakening. I mean, we can give a whole bunch of labels to it, none of which actually even begins to touch the experience of standing on the banks of the Ganga River, not even knowing that the river was sacred, not having any expectations nor any yearnings. I wasn't even spiritual enough to know that I was on a spiritual quest. I would have told you that I wasn't spiritual. I would have even said, that spirituality wasn't for me, that I wasn't one of those people, that I was much more academically inclined. And I didn't even realize how deeply I was being pulled and how deeply I was being called. And when I stood on the banks of Ganga, it was as though this veil was pulled off of me. But it wasn't just a veil over my eyes. It was literally a veil over every way of knowing that I had. So a veil over my mind, over my brain, over my identity, over every aspect of who I thought I was, how I thought I knew the world. And it was pulled off. And I could see. And what I saw was so exquisite that pretty much all I could do was cry and say, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And that was the spiritual transformation, the awakening, the touch, the moment, whatever semantics we want to use for it. It was the experiential spiritual moment. And a couple of weeks later, I was sitting with Puja Swamiji, who's my guru, one of India's most renowned and revered spiritual leaders. And I was sitting in his presence in the room where he met people. He gave what's called darshan. Just whoever wanted to come was welcome to just come and to sit in his presence. And sometimes people wanted just blessings. Sometimes they had a specific question, whatever it might have been. And sitting in that room, I had this awareness that I didn't actually know anything. And it was an incredible realization that here I was, someone who had graduated from, a top great prep school in LA, and then from Stanford University, and then was getting a PhD, someone who I had always thought was quite intelligent. And I realized sitting in that room, I don't actually know anything. I mean, I've accumulated a lot of facts. I can regurgitate a lot of facts, a lot of information. I've got a good memory. I can read something and memorize it and give it back to you on an exam. All of that which we had mistaken for actual wisdom, for actual knowing. And I realized as I sat there and as I watched this incredible being, I didn't speak a word of Hindi at that time, so I couldn't actually understand the words he was speaking. But just the way that he interacted, just the love, the pure love from him into these beings. And all of that which I had experienced in the 2 weeks prior to that already, the so many experiences of the heart just opening and exploding and expanding, and the awarenesses and all of that, I realized, my God, I didn't actually know anything. And so for me, it's been this incredible journey from thinking that I knew so much, thinking that I had so much, to actually realizing how little I knew about life, about really what mattered, about really who I was. I mean, I had all these labels, whether they were academic labels, whether they were cultural labels, whether they were labels given by a variety of psychologists or therapists, or labels I had come up with in my psychology program. But that was taxonomy. That wasn't understanding. And it was here, immersed in a spiritual experience, and one that was rooted in giving and serving, where I was taught from the very beginning, serve, give. You've been given so much. Just give and give and give. I remember, I'll share a very sweet story from the very beginning. I had gone in, it was the very first time that I was alone with Puja Swamiji. And I had been having all of these incredible experiences for the past few weeks of just literally seeing the divine wherever I would look, whatever I was looking at. I was seeing the divine in them. And I wasn't sleeping. I was just crying tears of ecstasy. I mean, I remember lying in my bed in the night, feeling like my heart was just burning through the wooden bed frame. And that how was I going to explain in the morning that I had burned a hole straight through the bed frame if I lay on my stomach and if I lay on my back, feeling like my heart was expanding so much that I was just going to take down the walls and the ceiling, and oh my God, the whole building was going to crumble. And finally, I was given this moment alone to see him. I had requested it, and I was given these few moments, and I said to him, I said, I feel so blessed. I've been given so much. I had, in addition to those experiences, I had this very powerful forgiveness experience of things that had happened to me in my childhood, ways that I had been traumatized and scarred, things that had affected my own self-identity, or rather had really been my own self-identity. So I'd had so many of these experiences, and I said to Swamiji, I said, I feel so blessed. You've given me so much. I want to give back. What can I do for you? And that was just what I said. I said, what can I do for you? And he looked at me, and you have to just picture the scene. I was 25. I had tears of ecstasy streaming down my face. I had no idea about India, about Hinduism. I had no idea about the vows of sannyas, the monastic tradition. I didn't know anything. He was a religious renunciant since early childhood. We're alone in this room. I don't know anyone who knows him. There's no way that our worlds overlap in any way. It was in the day long before social media or anything like that. And here I am saying to him, what can I give you? Anything. And he looks at me very seriously and he says, anything? And I said, yeah, anything. And of course, in my brain, I can hear my mom's voice yelling at me, saying, just stand up, walk out of the room, just leave. I've got my mom's voice. I've got my very, very renowned psychology of mind control professor, Dr. Phil Zimbardo, my favorite professor from Stanford. I've got his voice in my mind saying, just leave, just walk out of that room. But I knew that whatever it was, anything, yes, I would do it. And he looks at me more seriously even, and he says, do you promise? And again, I can hear this chorus of Dr. Zimbardo and my mother just screaming at me to get out of the room, to just stand up and walk out. But my heart knew. And my heart knew that, yeah, whatever he asked, yes, I promised I would give. So I said, yeah, I promise. And suddenly he smiles and the seriousness broke. And he says to me, he says, okay, 3 things. He said, first of all, I want you to get closer and closer to God every day. Every day at the end of the day, you should be closer to God than you were when you woke up. He said, second, serve the world. Every minute, every moment, every breath. He said, you've been given so much. Use it. Serve the world. And he said, third, be happy. He said, any sadness you have, any pain you have, just give it to me. And he held out his hands like that. He said, just give it to me. And it was an extraordinary moment on so many levels. But the teaching was very, very profound and very deep of this is what your life is for. To serve, to give, to get closer and closer to God. It's not about how much can I get, how much can I earn, how much can I attain, how high can I climb the ladder, whether it's the career ladder or the social ladder or the financial ladder or whatever ladder it may be. Just serve. And what's amazing is that these 3, although they seemed like 3 separate bullet points at the time, I've realized they are inextricably linked. That the closer you get to God, the more you serve. It's part of the package. Comes very naturally. The more you serve, the closer you get to God. And the more of both of those you have, the happier you are. It's like that intersection of bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, jnana yoga, the yoga of wisdom that brings us the real happiness. Not the I got an ice cream cone happiness, but the real joy that comes only from truth. And karma yoga, the yoga of action. And how they're not just 3 separate bullet points, but actually they are inextricably linked. And for me, it's been just a continual amazing experience of unfolding of all of these layers and of recommitting myself every day, of choosing again every day to get closer to God, to serve the world, and to be happy.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Many questions I would like to ask you, but just before we dive into some of the broader issues, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your awakening. Were you, as a young girl in LA, were you given to spiritual experiences and had a certain aptitude for resonance with sort of the invisible realms? Or were you sort of a straight, regular kid? And then when you hit the Ganges River, all of a sudden there was something in the chemistry resonance that woke you up. Because I think what you're describing, Sadhvi, are some extremely powerful experiences, and it's rather unusual for someone to have that dramatic a response without, any kind of preparatory work. You weren't meditating, you weren't soliciting this in any way. Tell us a little bit more about the awakening experience.
So childhood was not actually either of those. I was definitely not either religious or spiritual. I was raised in a Jewish family, in a Reformed Jewish family. I was bat mitzvahed, but I was bat mitzvahed, and I remember very, very vividly because I knew that it would matter to my grandparents. So it was much more this, I should do this for my grandparents than anything that had anything to do with God. And in fact, my most vivid memory of synagogue actually had nothing to do with God. And it had to do with being forced to wear a skirt when I didn't want to wear a skirt. And so rebelling against wearing the knee-length skirt that my mom made me wear by wearing a pair of my very tall dad's plaid boxer shorts underneath the skirt, and hiking up the skirt when we got into temple so that the bottom of my dad's boxer shorts would, hang down below the rim of my skirt, thereby defying my mother in this, you are going to dress appropriately for temple act. So I was definitely not someone you would have said was certainly not religious, and also definitely not someone I would have identified as spiritual, but I was also not regular. I was someone who had a very, very deep childhood. I had been through a lot of experiences in early childhood that pushed me into a lot of very, very, very deep work later in my adolescence. And what that did was it pushed me into this almost life or death, or actually literally life or death situation of basically understand the truth of who you are, the real truth of who you are, that isn't a victim of this or a survivor of that, that isn't this or that, but that actually is someone other than that. And to find a self-knowing, to find a self-awareness, to find a truth that was very non-regular at that young age. And I also was very, very, very deeply committed to truth. So truth for me was everything. And I was committed to truth at all costs. Didn't matter what it was, truth was the way. And so those were elements that I can kind of look back on and say, all right, this paved the way. Now, as far as spiritual experiences go, I had very, very, very deep spiritual experiences in nature. Now, because I didn't identify as a spiritual person, I never would have used the words like spiritual experience or meditation. But I used to go into the redwoods all the time, and I would lie in the needles beneath the trees and literally just lose myself for hours as I would watch the sun refracting through this lattice structure of the branches of the redwoods hundreds of feet above the ground. And in the light that reflected and refracted through these branches, all of the stress that I felt, everything I was going through, would just disappear. But it wasn't until many, many years later, when I actually had spiritual experiences, that I was able to look back and realize, oh, that's what I was having. So yes, there was the ground for truth, for depth, for a very, very courageous, especially at that age, willingness to jump in the deep end of the self. That sort of, wherever this is going to take me, I'll jump. I had done those deep dives into the self enough to not have that fear of it. And so when I got to the banks of Ganga and I stood there, now, of course, the experience that I had there was like any of the experiences I had ever had. It had no relationship whatsoever to any of the psychological deep dives I had done, because rather than dropping into darkness, it was a removal of the darkness, where the other processes had been, let's look at that, and the courage required to pull back the veil yourself and to stare darkness in the face. This was the opposite. This was a pulling off of a veil that was the darkness, that had sort of tricked me all along into thinking the darkness was in me, when actually the darkness was in the veil. And in this moment, it was that veil was pulled off. And not only was I given this extraordinary experience of the divine, literally like before my eyes,
Amazing.
but it was an experience within as well of knowing that's who I am. And again, I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't probably put together a coherent sentence for days. So this was not an experience that I emerged from with some grand philosophy about life. I emerged from it literally just babbling, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's so beautiful. But almost 25 years later, as a little bit of, vocabulary returns, it was an experience of knowing not only the divine in the universe, but knowing that that was the truth of who I was, and that this veil that had separated me from it was gone. And that there was nothing but God. Yes, here before my eyes, and here in me, and there in the telephone pole, and there in the child, and there in the marble steps, and there in the tree. And it didn't matter. And so the commitment that I had had to truth came in very, very handy in the days afterwards. In that moment, the experience was just so powerful that I don't think any walls that I might have had could have possibly stood up to it. It's like holding up a stop sign to a tsunami. The tsunami doesn't really care that you've got a stop sign in your hands. It's coming anyway. But in the days that followed, that commitment to truth was really powerful, because, of course, when the mind kicks in, it tries to sort of undo that, and it tries to bring in fear. And I started having more and more experiences like hearing voices and all sorts of things that the very well psychologically educated part of me thought were not things that I should really be paying attention to. Like, we don't hear voices. We don't pay attention to voices that we hear. And the courage to say, I've heard a voice. No, I'm not crazy. Yes, I'm going to look at it. No, I don't know anyone who's ever heard a voice. Yes, I know it sounds crazy, and yes, I know I'm not crazy. That concept of the free fall into, okay, God, this is now in your hands wherever we're going to go. And the stringence with which I held myself to my own vows and to my own commitment to truth. I had watched my own mind games for so many years that I no longer was able to trick myself. Like, myself knew my own games. So I was very good at saying, that's just the mind pretending we didn't just hear a voice. And I held myself to the truth. And yeah, so those are the only pieces I think that were there in advance. Plus, I am sure a lot of really spectacular karma from past lives that I just wish I could remember what it was so that I could be sure to do some of it again in this life, so that in the next life I could again find myself in this situation.
Beautiful. Well, it makes me think of the great autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, which has been one of the most extraordinarily impactful books on my life. Just to
This
read.
was the first book that Swamiji gave me, actually, after I had been here for maybe a month and was having all these experiences that I didn't know what they meant. And of course it didn't matter, but they just were happening and I didn't know what they were. He actually gave me that book.
That's amazing. Well, the question I'd like to ask you, since you've gone through the experiences, what is it about India that induces these experiences? I mean, you're a dwarf standing on the shoulders of giants, of a lineage of Westerners that have gone to India, scientific, secular, detached from their deeper self, and something happens to them when they're in that subcontinent. One thinks of Ram Dass just as one example. One thinks of the Beatles, one thinks of all kinds of our contemporaries that went to the East to gain that which was not accessible in the West. How do you understand that?
So I think there's two pieces. One is a culture. This is a culture that is rooted in spiritual tradition. And so in the West, most of us were born and raised to believe that our highest goal in life is to succeed. And to succeed by getting a great education, to being the top of our class, to then getting a great job, to making a lot of money, to building a nice sized white picket fence around our house. We're given a very specific view of success and also a very specific equation for happiness. Success equals happiness in the culture of the West. You're not happy. Oh, you should get a better job, make more money, buy more things, eat more sugary foods, right? Our happiness is that which comes from outside. So it's something we should be able to buy, earn, or if you haven't been able to, attain it in your career, well, don't worry. You can always go out and eat a whole bunch of French fries and have a chocolate cake and feel happy, or, get yourself a 6-pack and sit in front of, 130 channels to choose from. And surely something can bring you some happiness. So that's the culture that we're given in the West, most of us. And so it's not really a culture that's a very fertile soil for diving into the place where happiness really exists. And in the East, the culture is go within. And it struck me in the very beginning. I remember looking around here and seeing people who lived so far below the Western standards of poverty, but who were so much happier than everyone I knew growing up who had everything. And realizing there is a secret here. And it's a secret that has to do with this connection to spirit, a connection to an inner wholeness, an inner divinity, a sense that who I am, by nature of the fact that I am, is whole, is complete, is pure, is perfect, is divine. The scriptures teach us who you are is divine. And so it's not about what you make. It's not about what you wear. Now, obviously, I'm generalizing the culture of traditional spiritual India. You've got metropolitan culture in big cities of India that, mirrors culture in LA or New York or Paris. But the traditional spiritual world of India is all about going within. So that's one piece of it that I think is really important. When you are in college and you're studying for exams, well, if you've got your book and you've got your eyes and you've got your brain, you could study in your dorm room. But what we all who have gone to college know is that trying to study in your dorm room while your roommate blasts the music and people are running up and down the hallway, naked and drunk and yelling and, lots of music. And it's not a very conducive environment to study. And that if you really want to study, you're much better off picking up that book and going into the library where it's quiet and people are studying. The brain is the same, the book is the same, the eyes are the same. But there's something about being in a place where everyone is committed to studying, rather than where everyone is running around, drunk and naked and screaming and yelling and playing music, that makes you much more able to take in the information and to study. And so there's something about just landing in India that makes us, I think, go within. It's a culture around us where that's what people are talking about. That's what people are emphasizing. That's the narrative here is a spiritual narrative. I can't tell you how many people I've heard who just say, whatever happens in life, this is God's blessing. Whatever they have, this is God's blessing. Life is a blessing. And so it's a completely different narrative. But the other piece also is very important. There's something in the air here. And again, I don't have a measurement that I can say to you, and I've collected samples of the air and there's this many parts per million of this and here's how I know it. But what I know is that we feel it. You know it. You land here, you know it. And especially in the spiritual places. Places like Rishikesh, places on the banks of Ganga, places in the Himalayas. These spiritual places. And this is, by the way, exactly where the Beatles came. We're, 100 meters from where they came. This is where there's an energy. This is a place where for thousands and thousands of years, saints and rishis have been coming. There's something energetic that's here. I remember saying to Pujya Swamiji when we were in Los Angeles, it was the summer of 1997, and we were on a peace pilgrimage across America. And we were standing in LA, and I said to him, I know you say God lives everywhere. And I feel that. I said, but I feel God so much more in Rishikesh than in Los Angeles. I said, why is that? And he looked at me and he said, God is everywhere. Yes, God is here in Los Angeles just as much as in Rishikesh. And then he paused and he said, but Ganga is Ganga. And I love that answer because it's the yes and yes. Yes, God is everywhere. Yes, you can be awakened and enlightened anywhere in the world. You can access God anywhere in the world. And Ganga is Ganga. And there's a reason that this is where the sages and the saints and the rishis have come and have meditated.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's fast forward, Sadhvi, and talk about the pandemic that is engulfing our world, engulfing India, and in an unprecedented experience has put virtually everybody in the whole world in a similar situation of lockdown and duress, and therefore in the same conversation. And I think in the first instance, I would just love to hear from you, how do you view this pandemic from the point of view of your spiritual perspective? What do you think it means? What are the implications for humankind? Do you think this is a grand opening? Do you think it means really nothing at all and it's a little speed bump and we're going to continue our merry way? How do you understand the pandemic?
This is not a speed bump. That is for sure. But it is what we make of it. I don't think that what this is going to become is already written. I think we're writing it as we go along. What I make of it in terms of that which has happened is really very much in line with the law of karma. You know, in 2013, so 7 years ago, we had very, very tragic floods here in the Himalayas. And there was a massive flooding, thousands and thousands of people died, entire villages fell into the river. And there were so many people who came at that time, reporters, media people, who in interviews would say things like, and tell us about how Mother Ganga is angry at us, because of course Ganga rose and rose and rose and rose and swept away villages. And the media people would thrust, mics and say, isn't Ganga angry? Why is Mother Ganga angry at us? And at this time here, so many people have said, is Mother Earth angry at us? Are we being punished? And in both cases, I feel very deeply, this is not a punishment. Whether we talk about Mother Ganga, Mother Earth, God, my concept of the divine, whether in the form of Mother Ganga River, whether in the form of Mother Nature, Mother Earth, or a nameless, formless God, is not a punitive one. I don't believe that we're being punished by any means. But I do believe that when creation was created, there were certain laws that were put into place. Laws of nature. One of the laws, for example, is the law of gravity. If I walk off of a building, I'm going to plummet to the ground. And it doesn't matter what a good person I am, what an honest person I am, what a spiritual person I am, how much, money I've donated to charity, or how much work I've done, or how many rounds of japa on my mala I may have done. As long as I have a human body that weighs anything, I'm going to plummet to the ground. Not because I've been punished, not because God is angry at me, but because in this divine creation, there are certain inviolable laws. One of them is gravity. The other is karma. If you plant an apple seed, you're going to get an apple tree. And it doesn't matter how much singing and dancing you do around that apple seed. You know, you can dance the orange tree song, dance, and you can sing the orange tree song, and you can do, you know, orange tree asanas, and whatever you want to do. But that apple seed is never going to sprout into an orange tree. Because there's a law of nature that says the best you're going to get out of that seed is an apple tree. You might get nothing, but the best you're going to get is an apple tree. No matter what you do, you will never get an orange tree out of an apple seed. And we are in a moment in history where we are reaping a very bitter harvest. We have planted seeds, and those seeds have blossomed, and the fruit is on our plates, in our mouths. And the seeds are seeds of separation. So we have lived in this illusion that somehow that which is going on in a meat market in China is separate from us. That we could somehow be safe and healthy when our sisters and brothers around the world are not safe and healthy. That somehow there's a possibility for my health to exist in a vacuum, or my safety to exist in a vacuum. Well, COVID has broken that illusion. We are not separate. It has also given us the fruit of choices we've made. We have mistaken security for arms. We've gotten to a point where thinking that we're making ourselves more and more secure, all we've done is we've made ourselves more and more armored. So we've got lots of missiles, lots of bombs, lots of guns, but this isn't a war that you win by missiles and bombs and guns. This is a war for which we needed masks. And as we've been saying since the beginning, we've got missiles but no masks. We've got guns but no gloves. We've got bombs but not a functioning CDC. These are choices we've made. These are the fruit of the seeds that we have planted. And so to me, what we're facing today really is the fruits of the karma. God isn't mad at us. We're not being punished. We're just being given the fruits of the seeds that we've planted. But the good news is that the seeds that we plant today bear fruit tomorrow and next month and next year. And so every minute and every moment we are continuing to plant better and better seeds. Hopefully, that's what's in our hands. That's what's up to us. That's why I say, I don't know where it's going to go. It depends how we choose. One thing is for sure. The old normal doesn't work. Today it's COVID. Tomorrow it may also be COVID. But in another few months, or certainly another few years, chances are it won't be COVID anymore. But it'll be something else. It'll be some kind of antibiotic resistant superbug. Or it'll just be climate change. Or it'll be lack of water. The United Nations estimates that by 2040, the world is going to have only half the water that it needs. We could have up to hundreds of millions of water refugees.
Yep.
And today, even in the midst of the COVID crisis, even in the midst of God knows how many millions of Facebook posts about togetherness and oneness and our world family and all of that, we are continuing to engage in behaviors and habits of what we eat, what we buy, what we wear, and how we live that are continuing to contribute directly, immediately today to the deforestation of the rainforest, taking away our oxygen, taking away our ability to absorb carbon dioxide, taking away our water. We are making choices that are contributing directly to air pollution, to ground pollution, to water pollution. Choices that are contributing directly to the likelihood of antibiotic resistant strains of superbugs. Choices that contribute directly to us not having water or food. Choices as simple as not being vegetarians. Choices as simple as not eating organic, not buying fair trade. Simple things. Choices to let the world's grain supply be used in producing alcohol so that I can drink away my sorrows rather than be used in feeding hungry people. So we've got lots and lots of energy. But what we don't necessarily have is a channel for that energy. Mahatma Gandhi used to say so beautifully, what is the point of that speed which doesn't have direction? And so what COVID has certainly sparked is a lot of that energy and that speed, and we're all together and we're posting and we're yelling and we're saying no to things. And it's great. But what we need now is to understand what are the very specific choices we need to make to actually ensure that the future is different than the past. That we don't just recover from COVID in order to, welcome Ebola or some other virus or some other bacteria or some other fungus or whatever it may be. Or in 2040, no water. Or rising oceans that wipe away our cities. But to actually focus on breaking those borders and boundaries between us. And yeah, it's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. Those who have the luxury to choose must choose differently. That's the weight, you could say, of the privileged in the moment. Those of us with the luxury to choose, we must choose differently. We must eat differently. We must shop differently. We must dress differently. We must transport ourselves differently. And I don't mean we must all become, monastics, but it's just about consciousness. It's just about bringing that same consciousness that fills what we're posting online, that fills our hearts and our minds when we are thinking about what's happening in the world, and actually directs it to action, because we do know how to sacrifice. We stay home. Everyone's restless. Everyone's stir crazy. Everyone's, waiting to go out. But we don't. Because we understand I don't live in a vacuum. I don't live in a world where it's about what I want, when I want, how I want it. Because if that's the world I create, well, that world is a bubble that's going to burst any moment. And so we're called upon to be different. And this is where the action has to be different. And it's beautiful, you know, in our spiritual traditions, especially of India, but not only of India, emphasize this so much. The yoga of action. That every minute, every moment, every choice I make has to be a choice for love, for peace, for service. Every minute and every moment. It's not about a Saturday morning that I spend volunteering somewhere. It's about every way that I live. Can I bring peace? Can I bring justice? Can I bring safety? Can I bring oneness? Can I help the world? And this is the teachings of the Hindu tradition, of course. It's the teachings when the Buddhist meditative traditions give us practices of walking meditation. Well, what is walking meditation? It is teaching us how to be aware in every moment. Eating meditation, why bother? So that every moment of my life I may be conscious. Because only when I am conscious can I choose. If I'm not conscious, I've lost everything. I've lost every possibility. So I have to be conscious. Saint Francis of Assisi gave us so beautifully, "O Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. O Lord, let me seek not so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. Because it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, in giving that we receive, and in dying that we are born to the eternal life. And I love that for so many reasons, but for now, I'll just mention one reason. Let me be an instrument of thy peace, an instrument, a tool. And I love that because how do you measure an instrument? By how well it works. Nobody ever said, "Oh, wow, that is the most beautiful diamond-covered hammer I've ever seen. It doesn't work? No problem, it's beautiful." Nobody's ever said, "Oh, God, you've got a, gold hammer, that's great, but it won't hammer in a nail." Doesn't matter, it's beautiful. Yes, I want the one that doesn't work. No. For an instrument to be an instrument, it has to work. Whether it's covered with diamonds or gold is irrelevant. You need a hammer, you want a hammer that works. You want a drill, you need a drill that works. It's irrelevant if it's got a diamond or gold on it. All that matters is, does it do the job? And in our lives, we've gotten so focused on how gold covered am I? How diamond covered am I? How much is my show? that we have forgotten that we are here on earth to be instruments, tools. It's a core Hindu tradition as well. Nimitra matram, a tool in God's hands, which means we must be effective, not just loud, but effective. And I think we've gotten the loud down a bit, which is great. But I think that we also really need to figure out the effectiveness now so that we can emerge from this into a new world. Not our merry ways of before, because it turns out that our merry ways of before were actually just a merry go round that ended up getting us all dizzy and sick. So now we need to create a new, more awakened, anchored, truthful, courageous normal. That's what we need to act from.
Well, thank you. And it's worth just noting that you were speaking pure Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics. He says that virtue is willingness to be an instrument. Virtues are tools that we use for the cultivation of excellence in our spirit. And so thank you so much for bringing that in. And I think what you're saying, Sadhvi, about the pandemic being karma, we're reaping a whirlwind now because that's what we sowed. And we'll continue to reap the whirlwind, maybe to the destruction of the human species, as scientists are now beginning to indicate, unless, as you're saying, we fundamentally change our choices. And I want to underscore this and then come to, I think, a final domain to explore. One of the speakers on our opening session on the 22nd of May said the central problem is not the people at either end of the extreme, the people that believe in climate change and the people that do not. He says the real issue is the 60–70% of the people in between that actually know there's a problem. But in their day-to-day behaviors, while they know that they should be doing something, they continue to feed the problem.
Yeah.
And so they know what's true, but their behavior, their choices are still at the level of unconscious participation in that which is now consuming the world. So I just wanted to underscore the wisdom and gravity of what you just said, because it comes down to the choices we make every day, moment by moment. And to the degree that we can be conscious of those, that's the degree to which we can change the world, because it's comprised of choices that all of us make, all 8 billion of us. And so that actually leads to, I think, the reason why we decided to have this conversation, and that is your perceptions and your experience of the amalgamation of spirituality and action in the world, because it seems to me that that is the golden key before us. The world now is awash in spirituality. Almost everywhere in the world through YouTube, and we can see your videos. I've seen some of your videos, the various gurus, the speeches of Mandela, the Dalai Lama. We're awash in spirituality. We're awash in opportunities to do good. but somehow the people that are engaging in spirituality aren't engaging sufficiently in spiritual action. And the people that are engaging in spiritual action don't think that spirituality has much to say, because they lump it with the religions that have been part of the problem. So I would love to hear you as we wind this up, to speak to us about the interface between spirit and action.
It's so sad in a way. Tragically ironic that these two have seemed different, and that we even have to ask, where does spirit and action overlap? As though somehow you could be connected to spirit and not act. And weaving in the point that you were mentioning about the massive percentage, that 60 or 70% of people who know there's a problem and don't act. It's not laziness. It's numbness. It's a cultural numbness of, we've been taught, I mean, there's a lot of components of this, and we don't have time to go into all of it here, but in brief, we've been taught from very young ages many ways to deal with our own internal discomfort. And so whether it's through food, whether it's through drink, whether it's through sex, whether it's through shopping, whether it's through a variety of distractions, now we have social media. But we've been given ways, and of course, some are considered more socially acceptable than others. To most people, coming home from a hard day and saying, I need a drink is considered perfectly acceptable. People saying, oh God, let's go shopping. I'm in a bad mood. Let's go shopping. Again, perfectly culturally acceptable. The underlying issue is, I'm having feelings. I don't want to be having these feelings. I need to do something to make myself not have the feelings. And my choice of thing to not have the feelings is something that doesn't actually address them directly, but rather simply distracts me from them. And the dilemma of this method of coping is twofold. On the one hand, it's destroying our planet. The overconsumption of everything due to our personal sense of frustration, annoyance, boredom, sadness, depression, anxiety. We're actually consuming our planet through shopping therapy, eating therapy, drinking therapy, etc. So on the one hand, it's destroying the planet. On the other hand, it creates a culture where we all agree to this narrative, which is, I shouldn't feel anything. Oh, you're depressed? Come, we'll go for pizza. Oh, you're feeling sad? Come on, here's a piece of, look, I brought you a chocolate cake. This should help with your sadness. And again, aside from the elements of the destructive habits of, addictive behavior, the core teaching is those feelings are something to be dealt with, as in get them to go away somehow. In order to make choices that require some degree of sacrifice for the betterment of my world, I have to be connected on some level to those for whom I am sacrificing. So, you know, if you take any random mother or father or sister or brother on the planet, most of them would give the food in their hands to their child or sister or brother or mother or father because we love them, especially if that one were much hungrier. If you were, you know, finishing up your meal and your friend or loved one came in, no matter how much you were enjoying it, if they were starving and there was nothing else to eat in the house, and they said, oh my God, you know, can I have the rest of your burrito? You'd say, sure. You wouldn't say, no, you starve because I need the last 25% of this burrito also. You'd give it to them. And if you didn't give it to them, their hunger sitting right in front of you at the table would create a situation where you could not very comfortably eat that burrito with your loved one sitting there hungry in front of you wanting it. Because we are open on that level to the pain of our loved ones. We're able to tolerate that little bit of discomfort. But in order to make choices for our planet, I would have to open myself up to the presence of suffering, of almost 1 billion people sleep hungry every night. Think of their suffering. Think of the suffering of parents who themselves are suffering because they're hungry and whose children are suffering because they're hungry. Tens of thousands of children are dying of starvation every day. But to open ourselves up to that, that's not fun. I would much rather go out for pizza. I would much rather watch a movie than open myself up to that. And in order for us to make different choices, I have to be open to that. And the dilemma is then people say, well, but that's just depressing. And it isn't just depressing, because the truth is when I open myself up to the pain in the world, I open myself up to the beauty in the world as well. And when I cut myself off from the whole world, not only do I cut myself off from suffering, but I cut myself off from true joy. And so my experience of joy ends up relegated to the pizza, the chocolate cake, the movie. Because unfortunately, you cannot or you can't selectively cut off certain emotions. This is what, antidepressants do. And it's great. If you're suffering from debilitating depression, by all means, it's worth giving up temporarily the possibility of ecstasy in order to be free of the debilitating effects of depression. But whether we are treating ourselves through an antidepressant or we're treating ourselves through just our lifestyles, what we do is we lop off both ends of the emotional spectrum. I don't feel the depression. I don't feel the anxiety. I don't feel the grief, but I also don't feel the real joy. And so these 60 to 70% of people who are not making the choices that they theoretically would make if they were open to what was happening, chances are tragically not able to experience the real gifts that life offers. So that's the tragedy, is that we are given this culture that says, don't feel your feelings, numb them, distract yourself, go on Facebook, binge watch Netflix, whatever it may be, but do something other than feel open to the suffering of the world. And if I'm successful at numbing myself, at blocking myself, well, then I don't have to make different choices. Because then I've been able to absolutely cut myself off from any ramifications, any ripple impact of my life. On a On a deep spiritual level, when we speak about spirit and action, they are one. True action. You mentioned Andrew Harvey speaking of sacred activism. What is that? It's action infused with spirit. It is the action of those who have not numbed themselves, who have not distracted themselves away from the inevitable, natural, beautiful pain that we feel when our self in the body of others is suffering. So when I don't cut myself off from that, when I don't suffocate myself in order to not feel, just get it through the day, just get through the day, just get through the day, then there's room for spirit to flow through me. You know, I always say a heart attack, a physical heart attack happens when our blood vessels are so clogged with plaque that the blood doesn't flow. A heart attack isn't because blood doesn't exist, but it's because the blood can't flow through the vessel. And we have spiritual heart attacks when our internal channel is so clogged full of ego, of ignorance, of distractions, of pushing away, of false identities, of all of that there's no room for grace to flow. And so if my action is going to be infused by spirit, if it's going to be sacred action, what it means is that that channel has to be clear. Grace has to be able to flow through me, which means that I have to stop clogging up my channel. I have to stop suffocating myself. Stop numbing myself. Stop distracting myself. Stop living in the illusion. When I'm connected to spirit, everything I do is sacred. And this again goes back to the Buddhist practices of the walking meditation, the eating meditation. Can eating be meditation? Of course it can. Can walking be meditation? Of course it can. And it's not only eating or walking, it's through learning how to eat consciously, walk consciously, I learn to do whatever I do immersed in consciousness, means immersed in connection to spirit. Consciousness is being conscious of what? Being aware of what? What is the field in which that pure awareness, pure consciousness exists? Spirit, soul, love, divinity. But I have to be open to it. And when I am, everything I do is filled with spirit. But what I also find is that which I do falls a lot more in the category of service, activism, than, just hanging around and having a good time, because I am filled with an awareness that I am an instrument, that I am a tool, that the purpose of my life is to serve. Khalil Gibran said something like, work is love made manifest. It's not about sitting in a cave or just sitting somewhere and experiencing it. Action is manifesting that divine consciousness, that love, that spirit. And so for anyone who considers themselves a spiritual person, to believe that somehow they are exempt from action. And by the way, this is not just true today. Lord Krishna cleared that up thousands of years ago in the Bhagavad Gita. We must act. We must stand up and do our duty. We must allow Dharma to happen through us. And as I emphasize a lot, it's not always fun. It's not always romantic. It's not always glamorous. You don't always get a lot of appreciation for it. You're not always the one on the cover of the magazine or in the spotlight for it. But that's why he chose to give that teaching of the Gita to Arjuna, a warrior on the battlefield. Because there's very few things less fun or less glamorous or less romantic than having to kill your own family. And the teaching and the place and it was, when you think about divine scripture, well, why is it given to us like that? Why are the epics, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, it's about war? To wipe away any illusion that any of us should have that somehow Dharma is supposed to be fun. That it's supposed to be, that which I do from 9 to 5. Or that which I do because, I'm really enjoying it. But it's that which I do because that is how I am supposed to be. The tool, the instrument in God's hands. And that's what we're called upon to do today. And for each of us, it'll be a different way. But there's some things that we all can do. I mean, the choices of how we vote, how we eat, how we shop, how we live, how we run our businesses. There's a lot of choices that every single one of us makes every single day, regardless of our socioeconomic status, regardless of anything, that are either part of the problem or part of the solution. That every one of us can make. But in order to do it, we have to open ourselves. We wouldn't sacrifice enjoying ourselves out at movies and in restaurants if we weren't open to the fear of, oh my God, I could get COVID. Or, oh my God, our doctors and nurses are dying. I need to stay inside and stay safe so they can stay safe. Or, oh my God, I have an old mother or father or grandmother. I have to take care of myself so I don't infect him or her. If I don't open myself up to the reality of that experience, I'm not going to stay inside. And in the same way, I'm only going to choose differently for any kind of sustainable period of time when I open myself up to the fact that I don't live in a vacuum, that there is suffering going on in the world. And there's joy in the world as well, by the way, a lot. So we open ourselves to that as well. But we open ourselves to the fact that we are not separate from either the suffering or the joy. And that everything we do has a ripple impact, like the dietary habits of the people living in central China has rippled out into every corner of the world. What we do ripples out into every corner of the world. We must act, and we must act with spirit, with oneness, with connection, with courage. And with sacrifice. Gandhiji, I'll just conclude with my other favorite line of Gandhiji's, which is, there's always enough for everyone's need and never enough for even one man's greed. And so when we realize that we have a choice between either trying to fill my own insatiable greed, insatiable yearning, insatiable desires, insatiable sense of inner lack that I'm going to try to fill with things from the outer world, or I can be part of everyone and allow my life to be that instrument of peace, of love, of justice, of hope, of light.
Thank you so much, Sadhvi. You've spoken deep truth, and I think you've spoken for everything that we have convened Humanity Rising to achieve. All of us, everywhere, with every choice we make, we serve somebody. We're either serving the problem or we're serving the solution. And the more conscious we become of that reality, the more powerful we will be. And that's why we call this Humanity Rising. I think we've come to the moment where it's not the institutions, it's not the governments, it's not the leaders, it's all of us everywhere becoming conscious of our interconnection with all being and acting in accordance with that reality, no matter how excruciating our situation or the choices that we are destined to make. So I'm deeply humbled and very, very inspired by what you say. And I hope that we can have you back down the trail and we can
it would be an honor.
A partnership with you. And finally, I would just say before turning it over to Kim Rosen for a final poetry, I think, Sadhvi, you've very powerfully embodied both the West and the East. And I think in your being, you represent a global citizen that draws equally from both and has fused what has been a dividing between human beings for so many centuries into an embodied being that represents the future of humanity. And so I just want to acknowledge that about you personally, and thank you for your time with us.
It's been really a great joy, and I look forward to more of it, because we have to rise together and rising back into ourselves and the truth of who we are, and that one consciousness that never was separate. We forgot for a little while, and we need to just remember the truth.
Yes, indeed. So thank you. Kim?
Well, I'm not sure any more poetry is needed, because for me, that was pure poetry in concert with the beautiful emanation of the Ganga River coming from behind you. I'm remembering all the beautiful candles I sent out on that river, and it's a great nourishment for my own heart to see it. So I'm going to offer two poems into this poetic environment. a dance, as Jim just said, between a Western voice and an Eastern voice. The first poem will be a poem by D.H. Lawrence, which is called The Song of the Man Who Has Come Through. And the second is a poem by Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, called Undressing. The music is by Jamie Sieber. It's called Benediction, which is certainly what this has been, a benediction. Not I, but the wind that blows through me. A fine wind is blowing the new direction of time. If only I let it bear me, carry me. If only it carry me. If only I am sensitive, subtle, oh, delicate, a winged gift. If only most lovely of all, I yield myself and am borrowed by that fine, fine wind that takes its course through the chaos of the world, like a fine and exquisite chisel, a wedge blade inserted. If only I am keen and hard, like the sheer tip of a wedge driven by invisible blows, the rock will split. We shall come at the wonder. We shall find the Hesperides. Oh, for the wonder that bubbles into my soul. I would be a good wellhead, would be a good fountain, would blur no whisper, would spoil no expression. What is the knocking? What is the knocking on the door in the night? It is someone wants to do us harm. No, no, it is the three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. What is the knocking? What is the knocking on the door in the night? It is someone wants to do us harm. No, no, it is the three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. Learn the alchemy. True human beings know. The moment you admit what troubles you've been given, the door will open. Welcome difficulties like a familiar comrade. Joke with torment brought by the friend. Sorrows are the rags of old clothes and jackets that serve to cover for a while and then are taken off. That undressing and the beautiful naked body underneath is the sweetness that comes after grief. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. Call it to your arms where it can change. Learn the alchemy true human beings know. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open. Welcome difficulties like a familiar comrade. Joke with torment brought by the friend. What is the knocking? What is the knocking on the door in the night? It is the three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. call it to your arms where it can change. Not I, but the wind that blows through me. A fine wind is blowing the new direction of time. If only, most lovely of all, I yield myself and am borrowed by that fine, fine wind that takes its course through the chaos of the world. Not I, but the wind that blows through me. Thank you so much. Poem by D.H. Lawrence called The Song of the Man Who Has Come Through, and a poem by Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, called Undressing, music by Jamie Sieber.
Thank you, Kim. You're as good as it gets. And you channeled Sadhvi through the poetry so beautifully. The hurt we embrace becomes joy. What a beautiful, beautiful expression of reality. So thank you both for a marvelous session. I've been inspired in every cell in my body as I've listened to both of you. And tomorrow we're going to continue our journey. We'll be hearing from Jan Golding from Israel, who's convened a very powerful panel discussion on solutions that are being contemplated and implemented around the world. As Humanity Rising continues day by day, between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European time. But I must say, I love these intermittent dialogues. I think it is so important in the rush of events, in the agony of trying to figure out how we increase our strategic effectiveness, how we mend a broken world, to just pause as we have today and listen to some sublime poetry and listen to some deep, deep truth expressed with love. It's important that we hold the still point in a dancing world. So Sadhvi, thank you once again. Kim, thank you. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station, 5 to 7 o'clock p.m. here on Zoom and through our various channel partners. Bye, everyone.